All right. We're going to switch topics up now. Kind of. Still pretty similar. Kelsey, you wanted to talk about TSM's drafts a little bit, right?
Yeah, so there was a lot of frustration with the TSM drafting situation. We talked a little bit about the performance of the team, the fact that they didn't seem to understand a lot of basic map movement stuff, but people really tunnel visioned on a few things from draft that seemed really obvious. I think the first thing that people brought up was when they started playing the hyper carry, AD carries with the supportive mid. So that was one thing that people complained about with TSM's draft because they decided it completely misunderstood like what TSM were good at. Another thing that people thought was really bad was when they played against Gigabyte Marines, they would fail to ban Gragas after playing them several times, and they would fail to ban Ziggs sometimes, things like this. And then in the final match, like people, the thing that kind of, I think the straw that broke the camel's back on people looking at the matchups on the final match, the tiebreaker match, was they had a lot of bad lane matchups that game. And then also in addition, they banned 2 champions that Betty basically never plays ever, and just gave him the champion that he will always pick, right? The Ashe. Like he'll always pick that if that's up. So I think that those were the main points that I saw over and over again about TSM's draft. So I wanted to ask, like, how bad was the draft really? Was it something that we can say cost them the tournament in some ways?
So I have Oh, you want to go, Emily? No. Okay. So I have the opinion that, yes, the drafts were bad, but I didn't think it was an issue with decision-making during pick ban. There are obvious instances where it was dumb. Like those bans, you can say, like, those were bad bans. You shouldn't be banning those things against them. But I thought that they just struggled more in the tournament meta due to, like, player limitations and team limitations. So Syndra, strongest mage champion that everyone's playing in mid lane. The most 2 common counters for it are Fizz and Echo, and Bjergsen doesn't play either of them. They play Jace every time that the other team gets the Syndra. I think they played Ori a couple times, but for the most part, they're playing the Jace into it, which makes their team comps really weird. And then we talk about the Protect the Turtle comp being bad for TSM, but it was one of the strongest comps the entire competition, the entire tournament so far, that, like, you run 2 shields and a Caitlyn or something, and you become a monster team late game. And so, like, that's not a bad draft. It's like you can't play that with Turtle. And then you can't early take Fizz and flex it because Bjergsen doesn't play it. So you end up in a lot of situations where you're really, like, handicapped by what your players can do. And that's not like, oh man, during pick ban, Par should have just done this thing. And that's where I felt like a lot of people were off base with the draft. Even if the criticism was, like, the right amount for the drafts, I didn't feel like it was right to be like, what is Par doing? I'm like, why can't you flex Fizz? Why is your team incapable of playing with Fizz mid lane when, like, Optimus is doing it and Faker's doing it and, like, everyone's doing it? That's where I had a problem.
I will say I was... Oh, go.
No, I was just going to say that it's, like, I think the Ori pick is fine. In general, I think they were too afraid to early pick solo lanes in general. So that would be one concern that I had with them, is just... like, you can blind Ori in a lot of situations, for example, and they just, like, avoided doing that a lot. So I think that there are a few situations where draft priority or understanding of draft where you're always picking your solo lane, your duo lane champions, like, early on in the draft was a little bit outdated. So, like, that draft philosophy I had a few issues with. So, like, the philosophy of the draft rather than specific picks for me were more of a problem. And that's why, like, I am more critical of the draft, I guess, than other people would be. But I don't think by any means that it was, like, their biggest problem. And the one criticism that really was weird to me was, like, the hyper carry ADC supportive mid thing. Like, I think that's fine. So, especially if your supportive mid is Orianna. But
yeah, I mean, that one still has enough like damage and playmaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, so I was one of the biggest critics when teams weren't banning Gragas, and this was not just TSM, actually. It was a few teams. And the reason why I'm super critical of that is because I see this all the time, especially international events, but even sometimes in domestic leagues. Like, this will even happen in Korea, where, like, a team is like, no, this team is, like, so much, like, we know we can beat them, and it doesn't really matter what they play, I feel is the mindset that goes through there. And it's like, if you know that this team, even if you are better than them, has this special, like, specific pick, and they don't usually lose with it, and it's the only thing that their top laner has played at any sort of, like, comparative level, then maybe you should just ban it.
It's like the Ziggs
maybe pick. That is more valuable, in my opinion, in a draft. It is more valuable to ban that than ban, like, an OP, because as we then saw, like, with certain OPs, like the Galio, for example, like, they had one really great game that I liked where they were combining the Galio ult with the Zed.
Yep.
That I thought was really cool. But, like, other than that one game, and even in that game, like, laning, not so great. Like, Stark obviously just picked up the champion. Like, I mean, it's not difficult to see that. And so I feel like if you, like, this happens at international events all the time. It always annoys me. If you know that a team, you played this team before, you know that they picked this, just ban it. Even if you think you're better than them, you know what? It's security. Just do it. Like, I'm so sick of teams doing this, honestly. Like, I know this is turning into a rant, but I see it all the time.
I mean,
other than that, though, like, I will say, I think it's unfair to, and I think it's not attacking, because we talked about TSM, right, already? And I'm sure we'll talk more about them on the show, but, like, TSM made a lot of mistakes, like execution mistakes that should be addressed before blaming the draft for not making it into the knockout stage. Like, I don't think criticizing the draft shouldn't lead to people saying, oh, draft was the thing that, like, ultimately made the difference between making it out and not making it out. Because I actually don't think that's true. I think TSM executes better on some of these drafts that they did have, and they win.
Right. I would say, like, you look at that Jace pick that I was saying I didn't really like into Syndra. They still, against G2, I think it was, had that huge lead, like 6-7K. They have Baron and Elder, and they can't break an inhib turret. That's not like, oh, man, their draft really let them down this game. It's like, you should win from that position. If you're not winning from that position, your team is bad at macro or something. There's issues beyond the draft.
Yeah. That's where it really, like, that's where criticizing the draft bothers me. Like, I think it's fine to criticize the draft because I think, like, there are some head scratchers there, like, again, the Gragas Ziggs or the banning Twitch and Kog'Maw against Betty. I don't think Betty has played Kog'Maw once, and I think he's played Twitch once in this tournament and he lost. So that was kind of, like, okay, a little weird. But I don't think, and honestly, like, it's really rare, even though draft is kind of the easiest thing to look at, it's really rare that I've seen a team, like, not advance because of drafting only. Like, I actually can't think off the top of my head of a situation where I've ever seen a team, like, you can clearly define, like, this team did not make it because their drafts were terrible. I don't know if you guys can think of one.
Yeah, it's a little hard to think off the top of my head. There's definitely been, like, times where you're like, what is this team doing? They're just, like, kind of playing their own game, but that's often almost more of like a, did they misread the meta than it is like, oh, they keep getting out drafted super hard, they don't know how, like, oh, they don't know these matchups or something. I always felt most of the time that I have big issues with how the drafts were playing out. It was more like understanding the meta properly, which can happen at tournaments when you're on a new patch and you have like 2 weeks to get ready and you're not scrimming the top, like all the top teams consistently.
And I guess some things, it's like when you do things like you draft bad matchups in every lane, right? It's really hard to play with that most of the time.
So you're talking more about like that Flash Wolves last game because they didn't really have any playmaking and priority anywhere.
Yeah, so that kind of situation, yeah, I can see where you would fall super hard on the draft, but I think that they managed to actually kind of pull it out in some situations, so I think it was okay, and you can't really blame the draft completely for that game. I mean, Turtle had some interesting moments in that particular game, in particular if we want to look at things, like the way that his build order was really weird. With I think he went like a tier into Triforce and didn't build Blade of the Ruined King until super late or something on his rail. I don't know. It was there are a lot of different flaws, I guess is the point, but you do make it really hard for yourself if you pick like 2 losing solo lane matchups and a less aggressive jungle pick, like Graves, for example. So I do think you kind of put yourself in a hole when you do that. But a lot of people could see the philosophy behind that. Like, I talked to someone else who had an interesting take on that, which is that flash wolves are even worse. Like, that TSM were trying to use the G2 strategy, and flash wolves are even worse than TSM at understanding what to do when you get past the 40-minute mark. So, like, TSM adopted double tier, super scaling. Like, we'll just be able to out-team fight them and this type of crutch strategy. So, yeah,
in fairness, that's not like
that's
a bad bet in this tournament.
There was one Dragon team fight where like Biofrost got walled off by Taliyah. That was a team fight where like they blew a lot on Sven, and if you just had like that extra Karma shield, they probably turned that team fight because it was like such a flubbed kind of engage on the side of Flash Wolf. So I think like if you're saying, yeah, we're TSM, we'll take a bunch of shields and then come late game we'll out team fight you, I can kind of see the philosophy behind that, but it also doesn't really play to their strengths where it's like we're supposed to have 2 really good laners. As much as we said Haunter underperformed, he actually had some of the better laning stats over the course of the tournament. So like you could say hypothetically, you know, Bjergsen on Syndra and stuff like that, but then it felt like he stopped getting Syndra and had to play these like more losing matchups. Because yeah, he didn't have an answer for Taliyah, and they played Ryze into it twice, which felt awful.
Ryze all around, like,
just play
and
an assassin.
Ryze is usually good, but like, I did not like Ryze at this tournament at all.
Yeah, I felt like it took way too long to turn
online. I know we
online.
said we weren't going to harp on drafts, but like, good God, stop picking mid lane.
Well, this is more the problem that we were saying, right? Was like, is the problem like, oh man,
Meta.
Yeah, did they understand their drafts properly and they just took horrible losing lanes, or was it like, did they have anything that they wanted to play in Taliyah now that like, you know, Victor's dead and a lot of the things that Bjergsen was always known for being really good on, it's basically like Ori, Syndra are the 2 things that we really recognize Bjergsen for, and then like after that he's playing a little bit of Taliyah, he's playing Jace, he's playing a lot of weird stuff because he's not playing the Fizz or the Echo that a lot of other mid laners were playing.
Were either of you surprised at the lack of Ahri priority?
No.
Like, not that she'd be like super high, but
I mean, there are more opportunities to take her into Orianna's because Orianna was a pretty high priority pick. So I was a little surprised at that part, but it felt like a lot of teams just don't think she's super useful beyond like that laning matchup. And once you get out of it, and Ori is just going to become way more useful in team fights. And given how late a lot of the games were going, it is a little understandable.
Like, Ahri's damage just isn't competitive enough, I think, for it to be super high priority. So I was fine with there not being a lot of Ahri priority.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I don't think any of us are saying Bjergsen can't play, because some people in chat are asking about this. We're not saying Bjergsen can't play Fizz or he can't play Echo. We've seen him play those champions before. It's for whatever reason, TSM was not picking them. So whether
Oh no, I was just gonna say, when you usually say like mid laner can't play like this champion, it actually doesn't mean that they can't play it solo. It just means that the team, for whatever reason, doesn't feel comfortable with them on that champion. Like, it's usually like 99% of the time when you talk to teams, it's a team thing. It's like, oh, you saw a lot with Aurelion Sol, actually, when Aurelion Sol was really popular. And you'd have mid laners being like, we have to ban it because I don't feel comfortable playing it. And that's not like, I can't play Aurelion Sol. It's, I don't feel comfortable running an Aurelion Sol composition with my team.
Right.
So I'd imagine it's a similar thing with Fizz and Echo.
Yeah, it's like, okay, Bjergsen on non-wave clear mids, our team sucks. We struggle with that. Yeah. We need Bjergsen with some wave clear. I mean, that sounds pretty believable to me. I don't know how you guys believe that.
I agree.